We've all seen them, those iconic images from World War II. The grainy black and white footage, the cheering crowds, that triumphant music playing over everything.
Right. And if you look at the official history, the version that's written in brass and marble, it tells a very specific story.
A story of unified resolve, of the rock-solid special relationship between Great Britain and the United States.
Exactly. You see Eisenhower, Montgomery, Patton, all shaking hands. A single, unstoppable Western alliance.
But history is always, always messier than the official version, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you actually peel back the layers of that very carefully curated narrative, what you find isn't a marriage of love. It's a highly toxic, incredibly fragile political arrangement.
And it's held together not by genuine affection, but by something much more raw.
A shared, desperate, existential necessity defeating Nazi Germany. And that was it.
Exactly. And exploring that fragility is our mission today. We're going behind the victory photos and those propaganda reels. For this deep dive, we've pulled excerpts from a really fascinating historical analysis that focuses specifically on these hidden front narratives.
And all this incredible content is sourced for you today from the channel Hidden Front History. It's all about these moments that didn't necessarily involve guns and tanks, but were just as critical.
Right. And this isn't about the grand tactics of D-Day or the final battles for Berlin. This is about egos. It's about geopolitical leverage and the sheer lethality of telegraph wires.
We are focusing on what many historians consider the single most dangerous moment for the entire Western alliance in that last year of the war.
Yeah.
And I mean politically dangerous, not militarily.
We're talking about a political time bomb, one set by the British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery in January of 1945.
Right in the middle of the freezing chaos of the Battle of the Bulge, of all times.
The fuse for this bomb was a series of secret telegrams. They were drafted from his headquarters near Zandhoven in Belgium. But Monty wasn't aiming at German targets.
No. He was aiming squarely at his own side. He was actively, covertly trying to assassinate the career of his own nominal superior, the Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower.
It's what many military analysts have since called the ultimate sin of coalition warfare.
And the language he used in those secret communiques was just devastating. It wasn't just a professional disagreement over tactics.
No, this was personal. He attacked the American soldiers who were, at that very moment, bleeding to death in the Ardennes forest. He called them, and this is a direct quote, brave but useless.
Brave but useless. And he went even further. He described the entire U.S. command structure, which, mind you, was in the process of recovering from a massive surprise attack, as a complete shambles.
It's genuinely shocking when you read the primary source material. Here you are, January 1945, the war is still raging, and the universally acknowledged British hero of El Alamein is actively stabbing his allies in the back.
He's not just questioning tactics. He's impugning the courage and the competence of an entire army.
So our core mission for you today is to answer two key questions. First, why did this betrayal even happen? And second, and maybe more importantly, how did Winston Churchill, who was facing the imminent, complete breakdown of the Western Alliance, how did he manage to stop this political explosion that was about to fracture the very foundation of the war effort?
Okay, let's get into it.
To really understand the gravity of what Monty did, we first have to, I think, step back and look at the fundamental incompatibility between the two men at the top.
Right. They were more than just two generals with different styles. They were, in a way, physical walking representations of two global powers that were moving in completely opposite directions.
And this tension, it wasn't a sudden thing in 1945, was it?
No, not at all. It had been simmering for years, and its roots were deep in these irreversible geopolitical realities. Britain, despite its heroic stand in 1940, knew it was the fading power.
The empire was stretched to its breaking point.
And its economy was utterly dependent on American industrial output, on American manpower. They knew, in the back rooms in London, that they were becoming the junior partner in this relationship.
So let's start with Eisenhower, with Ike. He was perpetually criticized, especially by the British brass, for not being a great battlefield general.
Right. And, if you judge him purely on divisional movements or tank battles, maybe there's a kernel of truth to that. But judging Ike that way just misses the entire point of what he was there to do.
He was basically the CEO of the entire Western Alliance.
He was the chairman of the board. That's the perfect description. His job wasn't tactical genius. It was managing the egos of a highly dysfunctional multinational executive committee.
And what a committee it was. You had Patton, Montgomery, Free French commanders.
All of whom often genuinely despised each other, more than they despised the enemy. And Ike's brilliance was a quality that's much rarer than battlefield genius. It was an endless, staggering, almost saintly patience.
He was the human glue holding it all together.
Literally. The sources talk about him chain-smoking 4 packs of Camels a day, just constantly mediating, constantly compromising to keep this volatile structure from flying apart.
And crucially, Eisenhower represented the new reality. He was the figurehead of this overwhelming industrial American superpower.
They were the ones bringing the endless flow of resources, the oil, the tanks, the ships, the food, and, most critically, the manpower. The sheer volume of American involvement by 1945 just dwarfed Britain's finite reserves.
Now contrast that with Bernard Montgomery.
A completely different animal. Tactically brilliant, meticulously detailed, and often clinically correct in his battlefield assessments. No one can take that away from him.
He was the hero of El Alamein, the man who faced Rommel and won decisively.
But paired with that genius was an almost pathological and insufferable arrogance. He represented the glorious but fading British Empire. Desperate to cling to the prestige and relevance of its military past in a war it just could not afford to fight alone anymore.
And this clash of identities, it translated directly into a kind of structural disrespect, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The sources are clear on this. Monty did not view Eisenhower as a superior commander. Not in any real sense.
He saw him as a glorified, nice chap.
Exactly. A guy who should stick to the dirty work. Logistics, supply chain management, political fence mending, the administrative stuff.
While the real professionals, meaning the British generals, would handle the actual strategy and the decisive fighting.
And that disrespect was just amplified by a fundamental strategic disagreement that went all the way back to the planning for the invasion of France.
The broad front versus the narrow thrust.
Right. Montgomery was convinced the whole war was dragging on because the Americans were, in his words, too aggressive, too sloppy, and too spread out. He hated the American doctrine of constant, fast-paced movement, which he saw as unprofessional and risky.
So his solution was the narrow thrust, a single, concentrated, overwhelming rapier blow straight into the industrial heart of Germany.
A lightning strike. And naturally, that strike would be led by his 21st Army Group, which was positioned up on the northern flank.
But Eisenhower refused.
Consistently refused. Ike, always prioritizing the sheer volume of his American armies and wanting to minimize the risk of a single catastrophic failure, championed the broad front strategy.
Advance everywhere at once. Maintain constant pressure.
Exactly. Even if it meant slower movement overall. And that tension between Monty's belief that caution equals professionalism and Ike's belief that speed and volume equal victory, that became the central strategic fault line of the whole alliance.
So you have this resentment building up. It's not just about a few tactical disagreements. It's Monty's deep-seated conviction that the entire American way of war was amateurish and was actually prolonging the conflict.
You could just feel it building. One source described it as being like pressurized steam in a boiler. It was just waiting for a structural failure to exploit.
And unfortunately for the future of the alliance, in December of 1944, that structural failure arrived in the worst possible way.
Delivered by the last desperate offensive of the Wehrmacht.
And this is where the narrative turns from, a simmering political tension into an outright crisis. The German counteroffensive, what we all know as the Battle of the Bulge, launched in December 1944. It provided the perfect, agonizing crack in the system that Monty had been waiting for.
The German attack hit the weakest point of the Allied line, creating that bulge deep into the Ardennes forest. It penetrated 45 miles and just shattered the American sector.
U.S. units were cut off, supplies were lost, communications were completely severed, panic started to spread through those freezing forests. It was a tactical catastrophe that should have prompted selfless, immediate Allied cooperation.
Should have. But that's not what happened in Montgomery's mind.
No, according to the historical sources, he didn't see it as a shared Allied tragedy at all. He saw it as a defining moment of vindication.
He looked at the maps, saw the chaos in the American lines, and was filled with this profound, smug sense of, I told you so. This, for him, proved every single claim he'd been making for months.
That the Americans were too spread out, too aggressive, fundamentally unprofessional.
And this immediately kicked his savior complex into high gear. He genuinely believed, and this is so key to understanding everything that follows, he believed the U.S. Army was moments away from a total, unrecoverable collapse.
And that only he, with his steady, professional, meticulous British hand, could save the entire Western effort from complete annihilation.
He literally saw himself as the stern headmaster stepping in to discipline and organize these unruly schoolboys.
The actual opportunity for this takeover, though, it came from an absolute military necessity.
It did. The German penetration had physically cut communications between General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group headquarters and the crucial American armies on the northern shoulder of the Bulge. Command and control was gone.
So Eisenhower, prioritizing that above all else, had to act instantly.
And on December 20th, 1944, in a purely tactical move to stabilize the line, Ike made the necessary call. He temporarily transferred command of two massive formations, the U.S. First Army under Courtney Hodges and the U.S. Ninth Army under William Simpson, over to Montgomery's 21st Army Group.
And you have to think about the sheer scale of that. Overnight, Montgomery gained operational control of well over 200,000 American soldiers.
All their thousands of tanks, and a huge vital stretch of the collapsing front line. It was an enormous responsibility.
But this is where Monty's political blindness just takes over. He didn't see this as a temporary emergency loan of troops to stabilize a crisis.
No, he saw it literally as a hostile takeover that destiny had engineered just to prove his superiority. And he immediately set about proving his meticulous methodology, often at the cost of American lives.
The immediate military consequence was stagnation, just a dead stop.
Monty instantly halted American counterattacks, even ones that had momentum. He started reorganizing the lines with what the sources describe as agonizing slowness. He refused to commit his forces until every single unit was positioned perfectly, exactly according to his textbook standards.
Which sounds great in a classroom, but in a crisis.
It was disastrously counterproductive. Every hour mattered, especially for the surrounded units.
And the arrogance of his actions was just staggering. You have to remember the scene. The U.S. 101st Airborne is famously surrounded in Bastogne, fighting for their lives, screaming for immediate relief.
And Montgomery is holding the crucial northern flank stationary. He wasn't just delaying, he was actively showing off his superior patience. He brought in his own hand-picked, young, arrogant British majors as liaison officers.
And what did they do?
They promptly started lecturing veteran American commanders, men who'd fought across North Africa and France, on basic frontline infantry tactics.
Right.
He was treating two American armies like they were training units, not crisis fighters.
Now contrast that deliberate delay with what was happening on the southern flank.
A world of difference. While Monty was perfecting his lines up north, General George S. Patton Jr. was executing perhaps the most incredible logistical feat of the Western Front.
By December 26th, he'd broken the siege of Bastogne.
From the south, yes. He swung three full divisions 100 miles, changed their entire axis of advance by 90 degrees, and did it all in 48 hours in the middle of a blinding blizzard.
Patton showed immediate aggressive action. Monty showed deliberate, arrogant stagnation.
That's the perfect summary. Patton was focused on the objective, saving the troops. Monty was focused on validating his own methodology.
But while Monty was sitting still on the battlefield, his real activity was happening miles behind the lines in a small communications office, waging a far more dangerous political war.
And that's where the story goes from a military problem to a political crisis.
So Montgomery wasn't just stalling the American armies under his command. He was simultaneously launching a covert political war that was threatening to break the entire coalition.
This was a high-stakes game of political poker, and he was betting his entire career against the patience and the political power of the United States.
The period between Christmas 1944 and New Year's 1945, the telegraph lines between his headquarters in London were, as one source put it, practically burning with political toxicity.
And the cardinal sin here wasn't the disagreement itself, it was the way he was communicating, the mechanism. He was completely bypassing the Allied chain of command.
Let's quickly detail that chain for you. Ike was the supreme Allied commander. He reported to the combined chiefs of staff in Washington and London.
By going around Ike, Monty wasn't complaining up the ladder, he was trying to saw the ladder off at the base. He sent secret correspondence directly to his confidant, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, the chief of the Imperial General Staff in London.
Which means the message went straight into the hands of the British War Cabinet and Winston Churchill,
completely excluding the Supreme Allied Commander from the conversation.
Yeah.
In a military coalition, doing that is essentially an act of political treason. It showed his utter lack of respect for Eisenhower's position.
It was a clear attempt to use the weight of the British government to force a change in the command structure.
And the content of those messages was pure political dynamite. the demands just became more and more explicit. On December 27th, for example, he wrote with this breathtaking dismissiveness that the Americans are in a complete shambles. There is no grip anywhere.
He went on to assert that the entire American front was near total collapse and that only his intervention had stabilized the situation.
And he didn't couch his ambition in polite terms either. He explicitly demanded, in black and white, that he be given full, permanent operational control of all ground forces on the Western Front.
It was a direct political lobby. He was asking his government to force Eisenhower's effective demotion into a mere administrator, a logistics officer.
This would have completely flipped the power dynamics of the alliance, putting the junior partner in charge.
But then the campaign turned intensely personal, which is what really infuriated the American generals.
Right. On December 29th, he stopped attacking the strategy and started attacking the fighting ability and the character of the U.S. Army itself.
And this is the source of that quote, the one that came closest to shattering the alliance. He stated that American troops were brave but useless.
Brave but useless, due to a profound lack of proper training and leadership at the lower levels.
We really need to pause here and just stress the profound gap between that accusation and the reality on the frozen ground.
It's unbelievable. These useless troops, as Monty called them, had suffered staggering casualties. By the time he wrote that telegram, the U.S. Army had absorbed over 75,000 casualties in the Ardennes alone,
including 19,000 killed in action.
They were holding the line against the most fanatical, the most lethal divisions of the Third Reich, elite SS Panzer divisions, in brutal cold with immense material shortages.
It paints a picture of extreme political blindness, almost a detachment from reality.
These telegrams were not about fixing a supply line or offering professional advice. They were a calculated political lobbying effort designed to instigate a formal British coup against the American High Command.
Montgomery was just supremely overconfident. He was betting everything on his historical prestige.
And he failed to comprehend that the power dynamic had shifted. He believed his genius alone protected him from the consequences of challenging the commander of the overwhelmingly superior force.
He was playing a game of poker, believing his two of clubs could beat Ike's flush.
And he completely forgot that Ike held all the chips, all the money, and all the replacement players. It was a deeply flawed psychological assessment. He thought the Americans would just accept the necessity of a British professional taking over. He got it so wrong.
The secret political poison was already circulating through London's inner circles, but the situation became catastrophic when Montgomery made the ultimate mistake.
He let the poison spill out into the public eye.
And he turned a private diplomatic rift into an irreversible public relations disaster.
That moment came on January 7th, 1945. The crisis of the Bulge was past its peak, but it was still a highly sensitive topic. And Montgomery decided to call a press conference at his headquarters.
The event that followed has been universally described by war reporters as one of the most tone-deaf and destructive public relations disasters in the history of coalition warfare.
It was pure, unadulterated egomania on display. The general stood before dozens of international reporters, and in that single 30-minute address, he used the personal pronoun I a shocking 57 times.
57? He didn't describe the Battle of the Bulge as a collective defensive effort. He described it as a masterpiece of his own generalship.
He minimized, or in some cases completely omitted, the role of the American armies, who had done the vast majority of the fighting and dying.
He presented a fundamentally false and deeply insulting narrative to the entire world. His main claim was that he had used the whole available power of the British group of armies to save the Americans.
Painting this picture of a disorganized American rabble on the verge of a total rout, only to be rescued by the cool, calm, and professional British.
And the numbers just expose the brazenness of that lie instantly. You don't need to be a military historian to see how absurd that claim is.
Not at all. While he was suggesting the British had borne the brunt of the decisive action, the casualty data confirms it. Americans suffered 89,000 casualties in the Bulge.
And the British,
who primarily secured the northern flank and faced relatively lighter resistance, suffered only 1,400. The idea that his limited British forces had saved the overwhelming American effort was statistically ludicrous.
And to make it even worse, he completely failed to mention the massive contributions of the American generals.
No mention of General Bradley's strategic oversight. And damningly, a complete omission of General Patton's heroic, rapid relief of Bastogne.
Monty's narrative was entirely self-aggrandizing. It was designed to cement his reputation as the only true master strategist. which would then justify his secret demands for total control.
The immediate fallout was volcanic. When the transcript of that press conference was cabled to the front lines, the American commanders were beyond furious.
General Omar Bradley, who was known for his calm, measured demeanor, the complete opposite of Patton's fire, reportedly turned purple.
He slammed his fist down on a table and declared to his assembled staff that he would never take an order from Montgomery again, even if it meant being court-martialed.
So the secret insult, which had been confined to London's secure communication channels, was now public.
And reinforced by a blatant lie in front of the world press. It crystallized every single American resentment about British arrogance, that fading colonial mindset, and the belief that the British viewed themselves as superior professionals lecturing American amateurs.
In the eyes of the American High Command, the alliance was at that moment effectively dead.
The secret political sabotage had become an open revolt, and that forced the ultimate unavoidable confrontation between the two most powerful men in the theater.
The line had been crossed. The insult was public. The challenge to his authority was undeniable. All the trust that Eisenhower had painstakingly built over years was just destroyed in a single ego-driven press conference.
And Eisenhower, the man who embodied patience and infinite compromise, he finally snapped.
This forced the ultimate existential geopolitical confrontation for the entire Western alliance.
Reading the transcripts and getting confirmation of the extent of Montgomery's secret telegram campaign, which was, frankly, bordering on military insubordination, Eisenhower made a decisive shift.
The sources describe him as going cold, focused, utterly determined.
No more shouting matches, no more mediation. He just used the most lethal weapon in a general's arsenal: bureaucratic formality.
He sat at his desk and he drafted a cable. It was addressed to General George Marshall, the U.S. Army Chief of Staff in Washington.
This was Ike's nuclear option, and he handled it with absolute precision. The text was polite, professional, and just terrifyingly clear.
He didn't complain about Monty's personality. He simply stated the undeniable fact that he and Field Marshal Montgomery could no longer serve together in command.
And then came the key line, the one that forced the issue across the Atlantic. It was a simple ultimatum.
It is him or me.
Eisenhower asked Marshall to immediately relieve him of his command if Montgomery was not removed from his post and sent back to England.
And Ike knew. He absolutely knew. He was holding all the cards. He knew what Marshall's answer had to be.
Let's just look at the numbers again. At that time, the United States supplied 70% of all the troops fighting on the Western Front, and critically, provided 80% of the logistical material and supplies.
Eisenhower wasn't just a commander. He represented the overwhelming industrial and economic force that was financing the entire war.
So by demanding Monty's removal or his own resignation, he was effectively putting a gun loaded with economic reality right to the head of the British Empire.
Before that fateful cable could be finalized and sent, a key British liaison officer, Major General Francis de Guingond, saw the draft.
And he had a moment of terrifying realization. De Guingond was a shrewd operator. He understood immediately that if that document went out, the unified Western Alliance, the structure that had taken years to build, was finished.
So he rushed to contact Churchill.
The sources say that when Winston Churchill, in London, received word of Eisenhower's ultimatum, the blood drained from his face. This was the moment of truth.
And Churchill was an ardent admirer of Montgomery. He saw Monty as the epitome of British military pride and success.
He did. But Churchill was, above all else, a cold, ruthless realist. He dealt in geopolitical facts, not sentiment.
He immediately looked at the numbers, and the truth was stark. The British Empire was utterly bankrupt. Its manpower reserves were completely exhausted.
And you have to understand the true function of Lend-Lease at this point. It wasn't just Britain getting some guns. They relied on American Lend-Lease for everything. Raw materials for their factories, oil to power their fleet.
Even basic foodstuffs like Spam to feed their civilians.
So if the alliance fractured, the U.S. Congress could, and likely would, pull the plug on that vital economic lifeline.
Churchill understood the crushing implications immediately. If Eisenhower resigned, or if Britain stubbornly defended Montgomery and forced Ike's firing, the political backlash in the American public would be catastrophic.
The alliance would fracture, the war effort would stall, and the only beneficiary would be Joseph Stalin in the East.
Churchill saw instantly that his spoiled child Monty, in his arrogance, had pushed the indispensable American partner way too far.
This was the moment the fading empire had to accept its new reality as the junior partner. Churchill's personal adoration for Monty just evaporated, replaced by the grim necessity of state survival.
He knew diplomacy was useless here. He needed to crush Montgomery's ego instantly and decisively to save the alliance.
So he dispatched Gingen back to Monty's headquarters with a simple, brutal, and crystal clear message.
And the message was just the unvarnished reality of the geopolitical balance of power. Ike has the gun to your head and he is going to pull the trigger. You have exactly 24 hours to issue a full, public, and unequivocal apology or you are finished.
This wasn't a suggestion. It was a death sentence, delivered by the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to his most famous general. He recognized that Montgomery had gone from an indispensable asset to a dangerous, war-threatening liability overnight.
It's an incredible irony, isn't it? A brilliant tactician like Montgomery could dissect an enemy's strategy, but he completely failed to understand the power structure of his own side.
He saw war as a chessboard, where the Grandmaster himself moves the pieces based on rank in history. He entirely missed the fact that the American center of gravity was logistics, production, and the sheer volume of men and supplies. Churchill's action was just the harsh geopolitical truth. We are the junior partner now, and you cannot insult the owner of the company who pays the bills.
This was arguably the most brutal lesson in humility ever delivered to a victorious field marshal. The historical accounts of that night in Montgomery's dimly lit caravan are just remarkable.
The arrogant warlord, the victor of El Alamein, was suddenly reduced to a shaken, small man, staring at the undeniable fact of his own irrelevance without American support.
The Gimmigan, recognizing the urgency and the finality of the situation, basically stood over Montgomery and dictated the terms of surrender.
And the apology had to be swift, it had to be total, and it had to specifically undo the damage caused by both the secret telegrams and that disastrous press conference.
The pen was the final weapon. Montgomery wrote what must have been the most difficult document of his entire professional life, a letter directly to Eisenhower.
It began with the standard, somewhat forced expressions of remorse. Dear Ike, I am distressed that my press conference has caused you trouble. I would never do anything to hurt you.
But the real meat of the retraction followed immediately, forced line by Digingand, specifically aimed at contradicting the most inflammatory quotes from his secret correspondence.
This was the forced penance. He had to write, "Your American soldiers are brave and fighting magnificently. It is an honor to serve beside them." A complete reversal.
And then came the final, crushing concession, the one that officially recognized the new power dynamic, signed by the man who believed he was destined to be Supreme Allied Commander.
Your very devoted subordinate.
Monty.
That one word.
Yeah.
Subordinate. That was the definitive political acceptance of his place. He had finally and publicly admitted that he was second in command. When Eisenhower read the letter the next morning, he showed his typical cool pragmatism. He didn't gloat. He didn't make a big deal of it.
He just took the draft of his resignation cable, the one that had threatened to fracture the entire alliance, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it in the waste bin.
And his response to Monty was short and professional. "Thanks, Monty. Let's get on with the war."
The immediate political crisis was diffused, but the relationship, and crucially, the overall power dynamics of the Western Alliance were permanently altered.
That apology saved Montgomery's job, but it completely destroyed his influence over major strategic decisions. From that day forward, Eisenhower largely stopped listening to London's persistent strategic advice.
He shifted decisively toward the American perspective, that broad front strategy that Monty had so vehemently opposed.
And you see the ultimate manifestation of this power shift in the final strategic moves to cross the Rhine River into Germany. Montgomery, sticking to his meticulous nature, demanded his usual approach.
A grand, deliberate operation in the north called Operation Plunder.
Right. Weeks of planning, massive buildup, an enormous set-piece artillery barrage designed to be visible and dramatic. Eisenhower allowed him his operation, but
he simultaneously unleashed Patton and Bradley in the south with maximum freedom of maneuver.
And the American generals, no longer constrained by Monty's suffocating need for perfect set pieces, moved with the speed and aggression that Monty had always criticized.
While Montgomery was busy spending weeks preparing his massive public assault, General Patton executed the ultimate act of strategic insubordination.
He slipped his tanks quietly across the Rhine at Oppenheim, literally stealing the glory of being the first across that decisive obstacle.
And that juxtaposition became the perfect metaphor for the end of the war, didn't it? Monty's careful, glorious, but slow methodology was just superseded by American speed and logistics.
By May 1945, when the victory photos were finally being taken, the U.S. Army in Europe numbered over 3 million men. The British contribution, while historically vital, was numerically and logistically dwarfed.
The outcome of the war cemented the American lead on the global stage, a reality that had been confirmed by this deep political crisis back in January. The telegrams ensured that the Americans would be standing in the center of those victory photos because they were the ones who had funded the event.
It's an incredible story of how close it all came to falling apart.
So, what does this all mean for you as someone interested in history? The telegrams were quickly buried deep in the archives, the coerced apology was forgotten, and the war moved on to total victory.
But the scar that Field Marshal Montgomery left was real. It fundamentally altered the trajectory and the power structure of the Western Alliance in its final decisive months.
We often study history through that spectacular lens of military success, the shrapnel, the tactics, the individual acts of courage.
But the source material for this deep dive reminds us that the most dangerous moment of that entire winter didn't happen in a frozen foxhole facing a German tank. It happened in a telegraph office. It was driven by political ambition and personal arrogance.
And Winston Churchill's intervention, which was driven not by sentiment but by cold, hard geopolitical realism, did far more than just soothe a bruised American ego.
It saved the Western Alliance from a self-inflicted wound that could have fundamentally altered the balance of post-war power. Churchill recognized what his brilliant general could not.
Which was?
That in coalition warfare, words aimed at a partner's competence are, indeed, as lethal to the cause as enemy bullets.
The crux of this story is that the alliance survived not because the generals suddenly learned to like each other. They never did.
No. It survived because the man who controlled the supplies, the logistics, and the overwhelming flow of money had the ultimate power to demand political compliance. Montgomery was forced to realize that the brave but useless Americans were actually the owners of the company, and he was just an employee who had forgotten his place.
We study history based on the battles won and the treaties signed, but this story shows that the outcome of a global conflict can hinge entirely on whether one leader is willing to crumple up a single bureaucratic piece of paper, that resignation draft that Eisenhower held in his hand.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? What other seemingly small, hidden political actions or secret communications might have dictated the long-term direction of history, where we only see the spectacular military results years later?
Something certainly worth mulling over as you continue to explore the deeper, hidden narratives available on Hidden Front History.